Sylvia Thomas recognized that look in Jordan's eyes, the one that meant she'd be wearing long sleeves tomorrow. Her ex-boyfriend leaned against the streetlight outside her office, drunk and smiling, blocking her usual route home. Panic clawed at her throat. Then she saw him. Gabriel Ferrer, the Mafia boss whose reputation cleared sidewalks faster than gunfire. Everyone else scattered. Sylvia walked straight toward him. "Please walk with me so my ex doesn't follow me," she whispered, voice cracking. Gabrielle's dark eyes flickered to the bruises on her wrist, barely hidden beneath her sleeve. Without a word, he offered his arm. They walked in tense silence, Jordan trailing behind but never approaching, even drunk. He wasn't that stupid. At her apartment door, Gabrielle asked quietly, "How long has he been hurting you?" Sylvia's answer came hollow. "Long enough that I stopped counting." Something cracked in his carefully controlled expression. He handed her his card. "Call me if he comes back." Sylvia's fingers trembled over her keyboard as she typed Gabriel Ferrer into the search bar for the third time that morning. She should have been processing invoices. Instead, she was falling down a rabbit hole of news articles, court documents, and conspiracy forums about the man who'd walked her home last night like it was the most natural thing in the world. The headlines painted a portrait in shadows. Ferrer Empire linked to waterfront development controversy. Federal investigation stalls over lack of evidence. Businessman or crime lord? The Gabriel Ferrer question. There were photos of him at charity galas in $1,000 suits, shaking hands with politicians who probably regretted those photos now. Articles detailed his alleged involvement in operations that stretched from the docks to downtown real estate, always careful with their language, always just shy of actionable accusations. But buried in the sensational coverage were stranger stories. A community center in the old neighborhood that never seemed to lack funding. College scholarships for kids whose parents had worked for him. A restaurant owner who'd been facing eviction until mysterious investors bought the building and locked in a 50-year lease at 1,980 seconds rates. Acts of unexpected honor from a man who supposedly had none. "You're playing with fire." Iris appeared beside Sylvia's desk, arms crossed, voice low. Her coworker had a talent for appearing exactly when you didn't want her to. "Gabriel Ferrer? Seriously?" Sylvia closed the browser window too quickly, which only made her look more guilty. "I'm just curious." "Curious gets you disappeared," Iris hissed. "My cousin's friend knew a guy who crossed Ferrer. They found him 3 weeks later, and let's just say open casket wasn't an option." Sylvia's stomach turned, but she forced herself to meet Iris's eyes. "Jordan put me in the hospital twice. Once with a concussion so bad I forgot my own address. The safe guy almost ended me. So forgive me if I'm not terrified of the dangerous one who actually walked me home without laying a hand on me." Iris's expression softened. "Sylvia, honey, that's trauma talking. You're confusing protection with—" He asked how long Jordan had been hurting me. Sylvia interrupted quietly. "Jordan never asked. He just did it and then acted like I'd made him do it. So maybe I am confused, but at least someone finally noticed." The rest of the workday crawled by with excruciating slowness. Sylvia's eyes kept drifting to the window, to the street below where Jordan had waited like a predator. Where Gabrielle had appeared like what? A savior? A different kind of predator? She touched the business card in her pocket, its edges already soft from nervous handling. At 5:30, she gathered her things with hands that wouldn't quite steady. The elevator ride down felt like descending into cold water. When the lobby doors opened, her heart stopped. Jordan stood across the street. Same spot as yesterday, but this time his posture radiated barely controlled rage. He'd been drinking, she could tell from the loose way he held himself, the reckless tilt of his head. When he saw her, his face split into a smile that made her skin crawl. Sylvia's hand dove into her pocket, fingers closing around the card, then her phone. She barely breathed as she dialed the number, pressing herself against the building's glass doors. "Sylvia." Gabrielle's voice was immediate, calm. He'd programmed her name already. "He's here," she whispered. "Jordan's here. Stay inside. I'm 6 minutes away." A pause. 5 if I ignore traffic laws. "You're a crime boss. I assumed you always ignore traffic laws." She heard something that might have been a laugh. "Fair point. 4 minutes." It was 3. Gabrielle's black sedan pulled up with the kind of precision that suggested speed limits were merely suggestions. He emerged with 2 men who moved like soldiers. One positioned himself near Jordan with casual menace. The other swept the street with eyes that missed nothing. Jordan's bravado evaporated. He actually stumbled backward. Gabrielle walked to the doors where Sylvia stood frozen. "Come on," he said simply, offering his arm again. This time, Jordan didn't follow. He just watched them leave, impotent fury radiating from every line of his body. They walked a full block before Gabrielle asked, "Have you eaten today?" The question caught her off guard. No, I don't usually. You don't usually eat, or he didn't usually let you." Sylvia's throat tightened. "He said I was getting heavy, that I should be grateful he stayed when I was letting myself go. So it was easier not to." Gabrielle's jaw tightened, but his voice remained gentle. "There's a place nearby, best carbonara in the city. You'll eat." It wasn't a request, but somehow it didn't feel like an order either. The restaurant was small, tucked between a dry cleaner and a bookshop, the kind of place you'd walk past without noticing. But when Gabrielle entered, the owner, a woman in her 60s with flour on her apron, lit up like he was her favorite son. "Gabriella, 2 months you don't visit." She kissed both his cheeks, then noticed Sylvia. Her entire demeanor shifted to delighted speculation. "And you bring a beautiful girl, finally." "Sylvia, this is Rosa. Rosa, behave." "I always behave. It's you who never behaves." But she led them to a corner table, brought wine without asking, and disappeared into the kitchen muttering happily in Italian. Sylvia sat across from Gabrielle Ferrer, notorious alleged crime lord, in a restaurant that smelled like garlic and tomatoes in somebody's grandmother's kitchen, and felt the first real pang of hunger she'd experienced in months. "You come here often?" she asked, then winced. "Sorry, that sounded like a bad pickup line. Only on Thursdays." His lips quirked. "And yes, that was terrible. But I'll allow it because you've had a rough day." The pasta arrived in steaming bowls, simple, perfect. The kind of food made with actual love. Sylvia took one bite and nearly cried. "Good?" Gabrielle asked. "I forgot food could taste like this." She took another bite, then another, and realized he was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What?" "You helped an old woman cross the street last month, corner of 5th and Madison, during rush hour. Traffic was brutal, and she was frozen on the curb with her walker. You took her arm, stopped 3 lanes of traffic with just your hand up and your determination, and walked her across like you had all the time in the world." Sylvia's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "You saw that?" "She reminded me of my grandmother. And you were kind when you thought no one was watching. That's rare." He leaned back, wine glass in hand. "Most people perform kindness. You just were kind. Past tense, unfortunately, because my grandmother passed 5 years ago. But she would have liked you." "I don't understand," Sylvia said carefully. "You're Gabrielle Ferrer. You're allegedly terrifying?" "I was going to say famous for not caring about people. I care about very few people, very intensely. Everyone else can fend for themselves." He set down his glass. "But I'm trying to adjust that philosophy. Recent health concerns have given me perspective." Something in his tone made her stomach drop. "Health concerns?" "Advanced pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. Diagnosed 3 months ago." He said it clinically, like reading a weather report. "Chemotherapy starts next week. Odds aren't great, but dying does make excellent motivation for life changes." Sylvia's pasta turned to ash in her mouth. "You're joking. About cancer?" "No." "About the motivation?" "Also no. I'm in the process of dismantling 30 years of carefully constructed criminal operations so I can leave something clean behind. Turns out mortality makes you want to be someone your grandmother wouldn't be ashamed of. That's..." Sylvia didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "That's the worst thing I've heard all week, and my ex-boyfriend stalked me yesterday. See? Perspective." He topped off her wine. "A dying mafia boss is probably not the upgrade you were hoping for." "Honestly," Sylvia heard herself say, wine and exhaustion and 3 years of bad decisions loosening her tongue, "I'm apparently attracted to men who hurt me. So a dying crime lord who's actually kind is basically an upgrade. At least you're honest about the expiration date." Gabrielle laughed a real laugh, startled and genuine. "That's dark. You started it with the cancer jokes." "Fair." He studied her across the candlelight. "Most people don't know what to say when I tell them. They get uncomfortable, apologetic. You made a joke about my mortality and your terrible taste in men. I appreciate the efficiency." "I contain multitudes," Sylvia said solemnly. "Mostly bad decisions and student debt, but still, multitudes." They talked until Rosa kicked them out at closing, two broken people finding unexpected comfort in each other's damage. When Gabrielle walked Sylvia home for the second time, she realized something that should have terrified her but somehow didn't. For the first time in years, she felt safe with a man, even if that man was dying, even if that man was dangerous. Maybe especially because of those things. At her door, she turned to face him. "Why are you really doing this?" "Because you asked," he said simply. "And because I have very little time to be someone worth remembering. You gave me a reason to try." Please kindly drop a comment telling us where you're listening from. This is a story of resilience, and we will learn that everyone matters. Please do subscribe as well. Thank you. It started as protection and became something neither of them had a name for. Every evening at 5:30, Gabrielle's black sedan appeared outside Sylvia's office building like clockwork. Sometimes he'd be inside, scrolling through his phone with that particular stillness dangerous men cultivated. Sometimes his men would be there first, the tall one they called Miguel and the younger one, Danny, who looked like he should still be in college but moved like he'd seen things that aged you past your years. Jordan never appeared when they were there. Predators recognized apex predators, apparently. The walks home stretched longer each night. What started as 3 blocks became 6, then 10, winding through the city like they were putting off some inevitable ending, which, Sylvia supposed, they were. One of them was dying. The other was finally learning to live. Foster care or group homes. Gabrielle asked one evening as they passed a playground where kids shrieked with the kind of carefree joy Sylvia barely remembered having. Both. 7 different placements between ages 6 and 18. She watched a little girl push a boy off the swings. Consequences of nothing. My mom loved drugs more than she loved me. I kept thinking if I was just better, quieter, easier, she'd choose me. She never did. "That's why you chose Jordan." It wasn't a question, but Sylvia answered anyway. "He was broken, angry, had a terrible childhood. I thought I could save him. Thought if I just loved him enough, he'd become the person I needed him to be." She laughed bitterly. "Turns out you can't love someone into being less violent. You just become a more convenient target." Gabrielle's hand found hers, brief and warm. "You can't save people who don't want saving. Trust me, I've tried." "Is that what you're doing? Trying to save yourself?" "No, I'm too far gone for saving." He said it matter-of-factly. "I'm just trying to leave fewer casualties behind when I go." The conversations grew more honest as the walks grew longer. Gabrielle told her about growing up in a neighborhood where poverty and violence were the same word, where his father disappeared when he was 12 and his uncle offered him a choice: join the family business or watch his mother lose their apartment. He was 14 when he made his first collection. 16 when he did something he still wouldn't specify, but the weight of it lived in his eyes. "I can't undo what I've done," he said one night, voice low. "I've hurt people, destroyed lives, built an empire on other people's suffering. I don't get redemption. I just get this, a few months to try being someone different before it's over." "You're walking me home," Sylvia said. "Protecting me from a man who actually should be safe. That counts for something, does it?" He looked at her with an expression that was almost vulnerable. "Or am I just playing at being good because I'm terrified of what comes after? Does it matter? You're still doing it." By the second week, Gabrielle's men stopped pretending this was just protection detail. Miguel started greeting Sylvia with "Evening, boss lady," delivered with perfect seriousness. Danny brought her coffee on particularly cold evenings. The order memorized: cream, no sugar, extra hot. When she protested the nickname, Miguel just shrugged. "Boss says you're important. That makes you boss lady. These are the rules." "I'm not important. I'm a clerk who files invoices." "You made boss laugh," Danny said, like this explained everything. "We ain't heard him laugh in 3 years. So yeah, boss lady." Jordan's attempts to reach her became increasingly unhinged. Text messages at 3 a.m. "You think you're better than me now?" Voicemails that swung between apologies and threats. "Baby, I'm sorry, please just talk to me." Followed by, "You're gonna regret this. You stupid bitch." He showed up drunk outside her building twice more, but never when Gabrielle's men were visible. He'd see Miguel or Danny, curse under his breath, and disappear. The third time, Miguel called it in. "Jordan's here again, boss. Want me to have a conversation with him?" Sylvia heard Gabrielle's response through Miguel's phone. "No, legal channels only. We're being good, remember?" "Being good is boring," Miguel muttered. but he just stood there, arms crossed, until Jordan slunk away. When Gabrielle told her he was starting chemotherapy, Sylvia didn't ask if she could come. She just showed up at the address he'd mentioned, a private clinic in a medical building that probably cost more per visit than she made in a month. The receptionist tried to stop her. "Family only. I'm family," Sylvia said with more confidence than she felt. Gabrielle appeared in the doorway of the treatment room, already in the chair, IV port visible in his arm. "She's family," he confirmed, and the receptionist backed down. Sylvia sat beside him for 4 hours while poison dripped into his veins to fight different poison, eating him from the inside. She held his hand when the nausea hit, brought ginger tea she'd researched online, read news articles aloud when he was too exhausted to focus on his phone. "You don't have to do this," he said during the second session, voice rough. "I know. Most people can't handle watching someone go through this. Most people didn't have you walk them home when they were terrified." She squeezed his hand. "Besides, you're stuck with me now. Miguel declared me boss lady. Those are the rules." He laughed, then immediately regretted it as his stomach rebelled. "You're using my own enforcer against me. I contain multitudes, remember?" The side effects were brutal. Gabrielle would emerge from treatments pale and shaking, pride warring with nausea. Sylvia learned to keep conversation light, to know when he needed silence, to have the car's temperature exactly right because chemotherapy made him perpetually cold. His family noticed. Of course they did. Lucia cornered Sylvia in the clinic's waiting room during the 3rd week. She was beautiful in that severe way. All sharp cheekbones and sharper eyes, designer clothes that probably cost more than Sylvia's entire wardrobe. "Who are you, exactly?" Not hostile, but not friendly either. Assessing. "Sylvia Thomas. I know where you work. I know you're 28. Grew up in foster care. No family, no money, no connections. What I don't know is what you want from my brother. I don't want anything. Everyone wants something from Gabrielle. Money, protection, power." Lucia's gaze was surgical. "He's dying, and suddenly there's a woman none of us have heard of, accompanying him to treatments, holding his hand like she has the right." Sylvia met her eyes. "He walked me home when my ex-boyfriend was waiting to hurt me. I'm holding his hand while he goes through hell. That's it. That's the entire story. You expect me to believe. I don't expect you to believe anything. But your brother is the first man who's been kind to me without wanting something in return. So I'm being kind back. Revolutionary concept, I know." Something shifted in Lucia's expression. Not quite approval, but maybe the beginning of respect. "He's gotten worse since the diagnosis. More reckless. Dismantling operations he spent decades building. Antonio thinks he's lost his mind. Maybe he has. Or maybe he's finally finding it." Antonio was less subtle. He showed up at Sylvia's office, all expensive suit and cold assessment. "You need to understand something about Gabrielle. He's not a good man playing at being bad. He's a dangerous man playing at being good because he's scared of dying. When the fear passes, so does the act. You think I don't know who he is? I think you're a woman with a pattern of choosing the wrong men, and you've convinced yourself the deadliest one is somehow different." Antonio's voice wasn't cruel, just matter of fact. "He's told you what he's done?" "Some of it. Not all of it. Not even close. The things he's capable of. He's capable of showing up every night to walk me home. Of letting me hold his hand during chemotherapy. Of being honest about being terrified." Sylvia stood, meeting his gaze. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I'm making another terrible choice. But at least this one treats me like I'm worth something." That evening, Gabrielle was waiting outside her office as usual. He looked exhausted. The chemo was winning some battles even as it lost the war, but he still offered his arm. "My sister and my second-in-command cornered you," he said as they walked. "I apologize. They're protecting you. I get it. They think you're using me. Are they wrong?" He stopped walking, turned to face her. "Are you? Using me?" Sylvia thought about lying, about maintaining whatever this was without examining it too closely. But they'd built this thing on brutal honesty, and she wasn't about to break that now. "Maybe. I'm using you to feel safe for the first time in years, to remember what it's like when someone protects you instead of hurts you, to learn that not every man who seems dangerous actually wants to destroy me." She paused. "Are you using me?" "Absolutely." His smile was slight but genuine. "I'm using you to pretend I'm someone worth saving, to have a reason to keep showing up to those treatments instead of just letting nature take its course." to feel like maybe I can be someone different before it's too late. So we're both using each other. Seems like it. Good, Sylvia said, taking his arm again. At least we're honest about it. They walked home together. Two people using each other to become better versions of themselves, while Jordan watched from a distance, and the cancer counted down its timeline, and neither of them acknowledged that every walk home brought them closer to the one where Gabrielle wouldn't be there anymore. The shift change happened at 9 p.m. every Tuesday and Thursday. Miguel left at 8:55. Danny arrived at 9:05, 10 minutes when Sylvia's building had no visible protection, though Gabrielle had assured her they'd staggered the coverage, that someone was always watching. Jordan had been watching too, learning the patterns, waiting. Sylvia was making tea when she heard her apartment door crash open. She'd locked it, she always locked it now, but Jordan had kept his key from when they'd lived together, back when she still believed love was supposed to hurt this much. He stood in her kitchen doorway, and the smell hit her first. Whiskey and rage, and 3 weeks of humiliation fermenting into something dangerous. His eyes were wild, unfocused, but his voice was terrifyingly clear. You think you're too good for me now. He moved toward her with that particular looseness that meant he was past reason, past any appeal to the person he used to be. You think because you're fucking the mob, you can just forget about me? Jordan, please. Sylvia backed toward the counter, her hand fumbling behind her for anything. The emergency device Gabrielle had given her. A knife. Something. Please? He laughed, bitter and broken. You used to beg me to stay. Now you beg me to leave. What changed, Sylvia? You used to understand that I loved you, that when I hurt you, it was because you made me. I never made you do anything. The words came out stronger than she felt. You chose to hurt me. Every single time. You chose it. Something in her tone snapped whatever was left of his control. He lunged. Sylvia had never fought back before. 3 years of Jordan's fists, and she'd learned to go small, go quiet, wait for it to be over. But something had changed in the weeks of walking home with Gabrielle, of being treated like she mattered, of remembering she was allowed to take up space in the world. She fought. Her nails found his face, drew blood. Her knee drove toward his groin but missed, hitting his thigh instead. It wasn't enough. He was bigger, stronger, and fueled by weeks of wounded pride and cheap whiskey. His fist connected with her temple and the world tilted sideways. She hit the kitchen floor hard, tasted blood, felt something crack in her ribs as his boot found her side. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard him screaming about respect, about loyalty, about ungrateful bitches who didn't know how good they had it. Her hand, still moving on instinct and adrenaline, found the device in her pocket. She pressed the button. Jordan didn't notice. He was too busy raging about Gabrielle Ferrer, about how Sylvia thought she was special now, about how he'd show her what happened to women who betrayed him. His hands closed around her throat. The world started going gray at the edges when she heard tires screaming outside, footsteps thundering up the stairs, her door already broken slamming open again. Get away from her. Gabrielle's voice was absolutely calm, which made it more terrifying than if he'd been screaming. Jordan's hands loosened. Sylvia dragged in air that tasted like copper and gasped prayer. Through her swimming vision, she saw Gabrielle in the doorway with Miguel and Danny behind him, and the expression on Gabrielle's face was the one from all those news articles, the one that made prosecutors lose witnesses and rival operations lose territory. The old Gabrielle, the dangerous one. You broke into her home, Gabrielle said, still in that terrible calm voice as he walked forward. You put your hands on her. You tried to end her breathing because your ego couldn't handle being replaced by a better man. Jordan scrambled backward, finally understanding fear. I didn't. She's my girlfriend. She's not your anything. Gabrielle's hands flexed at his sides, and Sylvia realized with crystal clarity that he wanted to end Jordan right there, that every instinct he'd spent 30 years honing was screaming at him to eliminate this threat permanently. You're going to... Gabrielle. Sylvia's voice came out broken, but it stopped him. Please. Not like this. Not for me. He looked at her, really looked, and she saw the war happening behind his eyes. The old Gabrielle versus the one he was trying to become. The man who solved problems with violence versus the man who was trying to leave something clean behind. His jaw tightened. His hand slowly unclenched. Miguel, call the police. The words clearly cost him something. Danny, get the security footage from all the cameras we installed. Every angle, every timestamp. I want documentation of him watching this building, learning our patterns, planning this. Boss, Miguel started. Now, Gabrielle's voice cracked like a whip. Then, softer, to Jordan. You wanted to hurt her because you couldn't stand that she chose someone else. The old me would have ended you for that. Would have made it look like an accident, or like you just disappeared. And no one would have questioned it too hard because men like you vanish all the time. He crouched down to Jordan's level, and his voice dropped to something almost conversational. But I'm trying very hard to be someone different. So instead, you're going to face actual consequences. Police, lawyers, a system that should have protected her from you years ago but failed. You're going to be arrested, charged, and convicted. And every day you spend in prison, you're going to remember that you're there because I chose mercy. It didn't sound like mercy. The police arrived, real police, not the ones Gabrielle probably had in his pocket, and for once, the system worked. Security footage showed Jordan watching the building for weeks. Text messages and voicemails documented his escalating threats. Sylvia's injuries spoke for themselves. The paramedics wanted to take her to the hospital. Sylvia refused until they mentioned the head injury, the possible concussion, and Gabrielle said quietly, "Please, let them help you." So she went. The emergency room was fluorescent brightness, and too many questions, and an intern who looked about 12 cataloging her injuries with clinical detachment. Concussion, 3 cracked ribs, bruised trachea, defensive wounds on her hands where she'd finally fought back. They admitted her overnight for observation. When the nurses tried to send Gabrielle home, visiting hours were over, family only, hospital policy. He made one phone call and suddenly policy became flexible. He stayed. Sylvia drifted in and out of consciousness, pain medication, making everything soft and distant. Each time she surfaced, he was there, sometimes reading, sometimes on his phone handling what she assumed was business that couldn't wait, even at 3 a.m. Once, she woke to find him with his head bowed, hands clasped, and she wondered if he was praying or just trying not to come apart. When dawn finally crept through the hospital blinds, she woke fully to find him asleep in the chair beside her bed, his hand wrapped around hers like he was afraid she'd disappear. He looked exhausted, pale. The chemotherapy had stolen weight he couldn't afford to lose, carved his features into something almost skeletal, a dying man keeping vigil over a woman who'd almost died because he'd chosen mercy over violence. "Thank you," Sylvia whispered. His eyes opened immediately, a predator's awareness even in sleep. "You're awake. How do you feel?" "Like I got beaten up in my own kitchen." She tried to smile. "But alive. Because you came. Because you chose to call the police instead of doing what I wanted to do." His voice was raw. "Instead of what every instinct I have was screaming at me to do. That couldn't have been easy. It was the hardest thing I've done in 30 years. He shifted, still holding her hand. "The old me would have ended him without hesitation, would have felt justified, but you asked me not to. And I'm trying to be the person you see when you look at me, instead of the person I actually am. What if they're the same person?" Sylvia's fingers tightened around his. "What if you've always been capable of choosing differently, you just never had a reason before? Then you're giving me too much credit. Or you're not giving yourself enough." She paused, gathering courage. "Everyone's been warning me about you. Your sister, Antonio, my coworker. They all think you're going to hurt me eventually. That you're just playing at being good until I'm not," he finished quietly. "They're not wrong to worry, but they are wrong about one thing." Sylvia met his eyes. "You're not playing. I've watched you choose the hard way over the easy way every single day. That's not playing. That's changing. I'm changing because I'm dying. That's not noble. That's desperation. I don't care why you're changing. I just care that you are." She pulled his hand toward her, held it against her bruised cheek. "You stayed. All night, you stayed." Jordan never stayed. After he hurt me, he'd leave, like my pain made him uncomfortable. But you stayed. "Thank you," Gabrielle said softly, and she realized he was crying, silent tears tracking down his hollow cheeks. "Thank you for letting me be someone different, someone better, even if it's just for a little while, even if it's just for you." The shift happened then, in that hospital room at dawn. They stopped being protector and protected, stopped being dying man and damaged woman, became something else entirely, 2 people choosing each other despite every reason not to, 2 people saving each other in ways that had nothing to do with violence or protection and everything to do with being seen. When the nurses came for morning rounds, they found them like that, hands clasped, foreheads touching, 2 people holding on to each other like lifelines, while the world outside continued its cruel indifference. Sylvia's apartment looked like a crime scene because it was one. Police tape across the door, blood still visible on the kitchen tiles through the window. Her belongings scattered where Jordan had thrown them in his rage. The landlord was sympathetic but firm. She couldn't stay there. Too much damage. Too many memories soaked into the walls. "You'll stay with me," Gabrielle said. "Not a question. That's not I can find somewhere." "Where?" "You have $43 in your checking account and your savings got wiped out when Jordan stole your debit card last year." I checked. At her expression, he added, "I'm a crime boss. We check things." "Former crime boss, allegedly." "Allegedly former." His smile was slight. "The penthouse has 3 bedrooms. You'll take the one with the good light. Temporary, until you figure something else out." Temporary lasted 2 days before Sylvia realized Gabrielle was dying faster than anyone had admitted. The chemotherapy was losing. She saw it in how he gripped the bathroom counter after treatments, knuckles white, trying not to vomit. In how his clothes hung looser each week, his body consuming itself, trying to fight poison with poison. In how he'd wake at 3 a.m., pacing the penthouse because pain wouldn't let him rest, trying to be quiet so he wouldn't disturb her. She heard him anyway. "You're not subtle," she said one night, finding him on the balcony overlooking the city, wrapped in a blanket despite the summer heat. Chemotherapy made him perpetually cold. "I'm usually very subtle. I built a criminal empire on being subtle. You pace like an elephant." She sat beside him, brought the ginger tea that was the only thing he could keep down. "How bad is it tonight?" "Scale of 1 to 10? 17. He took the tea, hands shaking slightly. "You don't have to do this. Play nurse to a dying man." "I'm not playing." Sylvia pulled the blanket tighter around his shoulders. "And you're not dying. Not tonight. Anyway, statistically speaking, statistics don't know you're too stubborn to die on schedule." He laughed, then immediately regretted it as his body rebelled. She held him through the nausea, brought water when it passed, didn't flinch at the vulnerability of watching someone so powerful become so helpless. "Why are you staying?" he asked when he could speak again. "Because you walked me home when I was scared." She said it simply. "Now I'm walking you through this. Fair trade." Temporary became a week, then 2, then a month. Sylvia learned the rhythms of his illness. Good days when he could almost pretend he was fine. Bad days when getting out of bed required negotiation with a body that was betraying him. She accompanied him to every appointment, learned medical terminology no one should have to know, became familiar with the smell of hospital disinfectant and the particular fluorescent despair of oncology waiting rooms. His family noticed. How could they not? The media noticed too. The first article appeared in a gossip column. Mafia boss Gabriel Ferrer, seen with mysterious brunette, is the alleged crime lord going soft. It included a photo of them leaving the hospital, Sylvia's hand on Gabriel's arm as he leaned on her more than he'd probably admit. The second article was crueler. Gold digger or Florence Nightingale, Ferrer's new companion raises questions. They'd found her employment records, her financial history, the police reports from Jordan's arrest. They painted her as either opportunistic or pitiable, with no space for the possibility that she was just someone who cared. "Don't read them," Gabrielle said, finding her on her phone, scrolling through comments that dissected her character with surgical cruelty. "They think I'm using you for money. Are you? I don't even know what you're worth." It was true. She'd never asked. Enough that people assume the worst. He took her phone, set it aside. "I can have my lawyer issue statements, threaten lawsuits. That'll just make it worse. Besides, I don't care what they think." Liar. "Fine. I care a little, but not enough to leave." Lucia cared enough for both of them. She arrived at the penthouse unannounced, bypassing security with the confidence of someone who'd always had access. Found Sylvia in the kitchen making the bone broth that was the only thing Gabrielle could stomach after Wednesday treatments. "We need to talk." "Not a request." Sylvia wiped her hands on a towel. "Okay. My brother is dying. You understand that, right? The doctors are saying months now. Maybe weeks if this next round doesn't work." Lucia's composure cracked slightly. "And he's leaving you everything. The penthouse. His legitimate businesses. Assets worth more than you'll make in 10 lifetimes. You've known him 4 months. 4. You understand how this looks? It looks like your brother is trying to make sure I'm taken care of. It looks like you targeted a dying man and convinced him you're in love so you can inherit his fortune." Lucia's voice shook with fury and grief. "He has family, people who've stood by him for 30 years. And he's leaving it all to some clerk he met because she batted her eyes and played damsel in distress." Sylvia set down the towel very carefully. I don't want his money. I want him to live. That's very convenient to say when you know he won't. You think I want this? The words came out sharper than intended. You think I want to watch someone I care about destroy himself, fighting a disease that's going to win anyway? You think I enjoy holding his hand while he vomits from chemotherapy, or watching him try to hide how much pain he's in, or seeing him get weaker every single day despite everything we're doing? Her voice broke. I would give back every dollar he's leaving me, every single one, if it meant he'd survive this. But I don't get that choice. So instead, I'm staying. I'm making sure he's not alone. I'm being here for him the way no one else seems capable of being, because apparently caring for your dying brother is less important than protecting the inheritance. Lucia's expression shifted, anger giving way to something more complicated. You really don't want the money. I really don't want him to die. Sylvia's hands were shaking, and I really wish everyone would stop treating me like I'm stealing something, instead of just trying to help someone. She stopped, not ready to finish that sentence. Love, Lucia said quietly. You love him. That's not we're not. You love him. Lucia sat down heavily at the kitchen island. God. You actually love him. You're not acting. This isn't a scheme. You just fell in love with my dying brother like some kind of tragic romance novel. Is there a non-tragic way to fall in love with someone who has months to live? No, I suppose there isn't. Lucia studied her for a long moment. He's happier now than he's been in years. Did you know that? Despite the cancer, despite everything, he seems almost peaceful. Antonio thinks it's because he's accepted death. I think it's because of you. I haven't done anything special. You see him. Not the reputation, not the money, not the power, just him, Gabrielle, the person. Lucia's voice softened. That's rarer than you think. 2 weeks later, Gabrielle collapsed during a meeting with his lawyers. Sylvia got the call from Antonio. You need to come to Memorial Hospital, now. She ran, actually ran, 6 blocks in office heels, arriving breathless and terrified to find Gabrielle unconscious. Doctors speaking in the calm, measured tones that meant nothing calm was happening. The cancer had spread, aggressively. Despite everything, the chemotherapy, the experimental treatments, the sheer force of will, it was winning. Weeks, the oncologist said. Maybe a month if we're lucky. I'm sorry. His associates began preparing for succession. Quiet meetings about territory, about operations, about who would step into the power vacuum. They spoke in hushed tones outside his hospital room, already mourning him while he was still breathing. Gabrielle woke 3 days later, weaker than Sylvia had ever seen him. He looked at her sitting beside his bed, unwashed, exhausted, still wearing the clothes she'd arrived in, and said, You shouldn't be here. Too bad. I'm staying. Sylvia. He struggled to sit up, and she helped him despite his protest. We need to talk about practical things. The trust is set up. The penthouse is yours. I found your college applications, criminology, of all things, and I've paid for you to finish your degree. Gabrielle, please, let me finish. His breathing was labored. I'm leaving you enough money that you'll never have to depend on anyone. Never have to choose between safety and poverty. You can have the life you deserve. You just have to promise me you'll actually live it. What are you talking about? I'm asking you to leave. The words clearly cost him. You stayed because you're kind, because you have this need to save people. But I'm not savable, Sylvia. The doctors are saying weeks now, and I don't want. His voice cracked. I don't want you to watch me die. You've seen enough pain. You don't need to see mine. So please, be kind to yourself. Leave. Live. Forget about the dying crime lord who got to pretend he was someone better for a few months. Sylvia stared at him, at this man who'd walked her home when she was terrified, who'd chosen mercy over violence, who'd fought his own nature every single day to become someone worth remembering, who thought, even now, that he was doing her a favor by pushing her away. No, she said. Sylvia, no. She stood, moved closer to his bed, took his hand in both of hers. You're the first person who ever made me feel like I mattered, like I was worth protecting, worth saving. You saw me when everyone else looked through me. You chose to be different because I asked you to. You've spent months trying to become someone your grandmother wouldn't be ashamed of, and you think I'd walk away now, when you need someone most. I don't want you to watch me. You walked with me, Gabrielle. Tears were streaming down her face now, unstoppable. When I was terrified, when Jordan was waiting to hurt me, you walked with me. You didn't have to. You didn't know me, but you did it anyway. So now I'm walking with you. I don't care if it's to the end. I don't care if it's hard. I don't care what your family thinks or what the media says or what you think I deserve. I'm not leaving. You don't get to make that choice for me. I'm trying to protect you. From what? From caring about someone? From being there when it matters? From loving? She stopped, but the word was already out there, hanging between them like a confession. I love you. I didn't mean to. I didn't plan to. But somewhere between the walks home and the chemotherapy appointments and the 3 a.m. conversations about redemption, I fell in love with you. The real you. Not the crime lord. Not the dying man, just you. And I'm not abandoning you now because it got hard. That's what Jordan would have done. It's what everyone in my life has done. But I'm not everyone else. I'm staying. Gabrielle was crying, silent tears tracking down his too thin face. You're supposed to save yourself. Maybe saving myself means finally choosing someone who chose me first. She climbed into the hospital bed beside him, careful of the IVs and monitors, and held him while he shook. Besides, you're stuck with me now. Miguel declared me boss lady. Those are the rules. He laughed through his tears. Using my own enforcer against me again. Always. The experimental treatment was a long shot, a clinical trial with a 15% success rate and side effects that made regular chemotherapy look gentle. Gabrielle was barely strong enough for it. His doctors were pessimistic. His family was preparing for the funeral. Sylvia stayed through all of it. Through the weeks when he was too weak to speak, too sick to eat, too exhausted to do anything but exist. Through the nights when machines beeped urgent warnings and nurses ran. Through the moment when his heart stopped for 47 seconds, and they had to restart it while she stood in the hallway, unable to breathe, bargaining with a god she'd never believed in. Through the impossible morning when the scans came back different. The tumor was shrinking. I don't understand, the oncologist said, studying the images like they were in a foreign language. This shouldn't be working. The cancer was too aggressive, too widespread. But it's responding. It's actually responding. Gabrielle, still too weak to sit up without help, looked at Sylvia. You stayed. I told you I would. I thought you were being optimistic, naive. I was being stubborn. There's a difference. She kissed his forehead. Besides, you don't get to die on me now. I have 4 years of criminology classes to complain about, and you're going to listen to every single one. That sounds like torture. That's the price of survival. Hope you're ready. He pulled her close, still weak but getting stronger, still dying but maybe impossibly starting to live instead. Thank you for staying when everyone told you to go. Thank you for being worth staying for. 3 years later, Sylvia stood in front of a mirror adjusting a necklace she still wasn't used to wearing. Simple gold, nothing ostentatious. Behind her, reflected in the glass, Gabrielle leaned against the doorframe of their bedroom, watching her with the expression that still made her heart skip. You're nervous, he said. I'm speaking to 40 women who've survived what I survived. Of course I'm nervous. She turned to face him, taking in the sight that still felt like a miracle. Gabriel Ferrer, healthy, the weight restored to his frame, the color back in his face, the death sentence overturned by sheer, stubborn refusal to comply. What if I say the wrong thing? What if... You'll be perfect. He crossed the room, fixed her necklace with practiced ease. You've been doing this for 2 years now. You know exactly what they need to hear. That was one-on-one advocacy. This is 40 people staring at me while I talk about the worst moments of my life. And the best ones. His hand settled on her shoulders. Don't forget those. The shelter was in the old neighborhood where Gabrielle had grown up, the building purchased and renovated with money from the empire he'd systematically dismantled over 3 years. Ferrer House, named after his grandmother, was the 5th shelter in a network that stretched across 3 states, each one funded by operations he'd sold off, territories he'd legitimized, decades of criminal enterprise converted into something clean. Redemption's expensive, Antonio had joked at the opening of the first shelter. He'd stayed on, surprisingly, helping transition everything to legitimate business. But I guess when you almost die, you can afford it. Miguel and Danny were there too, no longer enforcers but security consultants for the shelter network. They still called Sylvia boss lady, but now it was on her actual business cards. Sylvia Ferrer, Director of Advocacy Services. Ferrer. She still wasn't used to that either. The wedding had been small, just family and the people who'd become family through crisis. Lucia had cried through the entire ceremony, then claimed it was allergies. Antonio had made a speech about how he'd thought Gabrielle was losing his mind 3 years ago, taking in a random clerk, going soft, choosing legal channels over efficient ones. Turns out he wasn't losing his mind, Antonio had said, raising his glass. He was finding his purpose. To Gabrielle and Sylvia, the most unlikely love story I've ever witnessed. And somehow the realest, Miguel had added. And to Boss Lady, who made Boss actually smile. We didn't think that was medically possible. Now Sylvia stood at the front of a room full of women who wore their trauma in familiar ways, the flinch at sudden movements, the careful way they took up space, the bruises some had hidden and others had stopped trying to conceal. She saw herself in every face. 3 years ago, she began, voice steadier than she felt. I was so scared of my ex-boyfriend that I approached a complete stranger and begged him to walk me home. I didn't know who he was. I just knew everyone else was afraid of him, and I thought maybe that fear could protect me. She paused. The stranger was Gabrielle Ferrer. Some of you might know that name. Former alleged crime boss, current philanthropist, my husband. A ripple of surprise moved through the room. She'd learned that leading with the shocking parts kept people engaged. I know what you're thinking. How does someone go from fleeing an abusive relationship to marrying a man with that kind of reputation? Doesn't that just prove I have terrible taste in men? A few nervous laughs, and maybe it does. But here's what I learned. Danger and safety aren't always where you think they are. The man who seemed perfect, who everyone said was a good guy, who had a stable job and nice family, put me in the hospital twice. The man everyone warned me about, he walked me home. He called the police instead of handling things his way. He chose to be different because I asked him to. She told them about Jordan's escalating violence, about the night he broke into her apartment, about fighting back for the first time. She told them about Gabrielle's trial, not his. Jordan's, where she'd testified, with Gabrielle sitting in the front row, visible support in a system that usually made victims feel alone. Jordan got 7 years, she said. He'll be out in 4 with good behavior. And I'm not going to lie, that terrifies me sometimes. But I'm not the same person he hurt. I have a degree in criminology now. I work helping other survivors navigate the legal system. I have a support network. I have a partner who understands that healing isn't linear, that some days I still flinch at raised voices, that anniversaries of bad things can hit hard. She smiled. And I have really good security, because Miguel and Danny take their jobs very seriously. More laughter, less nervous this time. I thought I had to choose between being safe and being loved. That's what abusive relationships teach you, that love means accepting pain, that if you want someone to stay, you have to tolerate how they hurt you. Then I met someone who showed me that real love is safety, that the right person doesn't just walk with you when you're afraid, they help you become brave enough to walk alone, and then they choose to walk beside you anyway. Sylvia continued. Some of you came here tonight because you're ready to leave. Some of you are still deciding. Some of you left and went back and are trying to leave again. All of that is okay. Your timeline is your own. But I want you to know asking for help isn't weakness. I asked a complete stranger to walk with me, and it changed my entire life. The scariest thing I ever did was admit I needed help. The bravest thing I ever did was accept it. End quote. She saw tears, saw recognition, saw the particular exhaustion of women who'd been strong for too long with no one to witness it. You're not alone anymore, she finished. This shelter, this network, these resources, they're here because people who survived want to help you survive too. Because someone walked with us when we were scared, and now we're walking with you. However long it takes, whatever you need. You're worth saving, you're worth protecting, and you're worth the kind of love that makes you feel safer, not more afraid. The applause was thunderous. Women stood, some crying openly, some approaching her with stories they'd carried alone for too long. Sylvia listened to each one, gave out her card, made promises she intended to keep about follow-up calls and resources and being available. Gabrielle watched from the back of the room, healthy and present, and so completely different from the man who'd been dying 3 years ago. Antonio stood beside him, shaking his head with something like wonder. You really did it, Antonio said quietly. Went completely straight, built something legitimate. I had motivation. Gabrielle nodded toward Sylvia. She stayed when I was dying. Seemed only fair to survive and give her a life worth staying for. She's good at this. The advocacy work. She understands what it's like. That makes her credible in ways I never could be. Gabrielle smiled slightly. Besides, she's got a gift for seeing potential in people everyone else has written off. She did it with me. When the event finally ended, when the last survivor had been connected with resources, and the last donation had been logged, Sylvia found Gabrielle waiting by the door. The sun was setting, painting the old neighborhood in gold, and he offered his arm exactly the way he had 3 years ago. "Walk you home?" he asked. "Always." She took his arm, and they stepped into the evening. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, their route taking them through streets that had witnessed both their stories, his childhood poverty, her adult terror, the collision that changed everything. "Do you ever regret it?" Gabrielle asked finally, asking a stranger for help that night. Sylvia looked up at him, at the man who'd been dying and chose to live, who'd been dangerous and chose to be safe, who'd been lost and found purpose in walking her home. "Every day I'm grateful I was brave enough to ask, and that you were kind enough to say yes. You didn't ask a stranger for help." He pulled her closer as they walked. "You asked exactly the right person. I just didn't know I was capable of being that person, until you saw it in me, so we saved each other." "We did." He stopped walking, turned to face her on the sidewalk where 3 years ago she'd been too terrified to go home alone. "You know what's funny? Everyone thought you were using me for money, that you'd leave once I was gone, or once you got what you wanted. And instead I got a husband who makes terrible cancer jokes, and a career helping survivors, and a family of reformed criminals who call me boss lady. Is it everything you dreamed of? I never dreamed this good." She stood on her toes, kissed him in the golden light. "I dreamed of survival. You gave me a life. We gave each other lives," he corrected. "I was dying long before the cancer. Just going through motions, building an empire that meant nothing. You made me want to be someone worth remembering. You are. Those women tonight, they'll remember. The shelter has your grandmother's name, but it's your second chance at legacy, the real one." They walked home together as the city lights flickered on. Two people who'd met in desperation and built something beautiful anyway. The woman who'd been too scared to walk alone was now fearlessly helping others. The man everyone had feared was now someone worth admiring. At their building, a different one now. No bad memories soaked into the walls. Gabrielle held the door open for her. "After you, boss lady." "That joke's getting old." Miguel started it. "Take it up with him. Miguel's terrified of me now." "It's very satisfying, as it should be. You're terrifying when you're determined." He pulled her close in the elevator. "It's one of the things I love about you." "Just one?" "I have a list. It's very long. We'll be here all night if I start." "Good," Sylvia said, and kissed her husband in the elevator of their home, 3 years past the moment when a terrified woman asked a dangerous man for help and he became the person she needed him to be. "I like long nights with you." The doors opened onto their floor, onto the life they'd built from that single desperate request. Sylvia stepped out first, no longer running from danger but walking toward happiness, and Gabrielle followed, no longer the most feared man in the city but simply a man in love, walking home with his wife. Behind them, the past receded. Ahead, the future waited, full of walks home and shelter openings and women learning that asking for help was the bravest thing they could do. And between them, hand in hand, was the present, messy and real and worth every terrifying step it took to get here. This story teaches us that everyone deserves a voice. Let's build a community where no one walks alone. Please subscribe, like, share, and drop your thoughts in the comment section. Thank you.